Welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast, addressing all aspects of the digital enterprise, inspiring connection without boundaries and creation without limits. Thank you for tuning in. Here are your hosts, Thom Singer and Craig Brown.
Hello, and welcome back to, or if it's your first time, welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in to this show that is designed to be a resource for those who work in and around PLM. The Digital Enterprise Society, it is the forum for the exchange of ideas surrounding the tools, processes, and practices used across the product lifecycle. To learn more, visit digitalenterprisesociety.org. My name is Thom Singer, and I have the honor to co-host this show with Craig Brown, an industry veteran and a former PLM leader at General Motors. Hey, Craig, how are you today?
I'm great, Thom. Looking forward to the next couple podcasts. We're going to change it up a bit. We're going to do some things around topics that are important for PLM, but they aren't typically talked about for CAD or PDM. And so I hope this will help people. And I think it's relevant to working remotely. That's why I wanted to go in this direction.
Well, that is certainly one of the big topics of late is working remote, because we're all sequestered somewhere. We're all quarantined somewhere. And every single week, Craig and I, we try really hard to bring to this podcast interesting interviews and other ideas that are going to help all the listeners enhance and grow their careers. And I think today is going to be one of those todays. Today we have Jeff Moffa, and he is the CEO of Auros, is that right? Auros Knowledge Systems. And
it's
I'm really
Jeff, by the way.
Did I not say Jeff?
You said Jim.
It's quite all right.
It's one of those days, you know, you lock me in my office for too long and I'm going to make a mistake somewhere. But that's what happens. So, Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I look forward to talking with you guys.
So, Jeff, I don't read the bios that people's PR people send to us. You know, they're all fancy, heavily wordsmithed up. I'd rather you sort of tell us your background and what got you to where you are today.
Yeah, real brief. I'm an automotive guy by trade, an engineer by trade, and became very interested in the IT sort of things, how the big companies put together information systems that make a product development process efficient. With Ford Motor Company, I was with Ford Motor Company for 10 years, I think, and was lucky enough to do some very interesting research-oriented projects in this area. After that, became very interested in how knowledge can be managed within these kinds of systems, and left to work with a couple bright guys to form a company called Emergent Systems. And later we spun out our software division called Auros Knowledge Systems, for which I am the CEO.
Hey, Jeff, it's good to hear your voice again. You and I have done a few things over the years, and I thought it would be helpful for our audience to appreciate this topic of knowledge management. I was always surprised as we presented for different forums how people really were not aware of what knowledge is in the context of what we're going to talk about. And then more importantly, how you manage it. And so like every topic that might be kind of different, it would help if we start with a definition. Can you give us your definition for knowledge management and maybe why it's unique from so many other topics?
Yeah, I mean, knowledge management is the orchestrated and marshaling of resources to capture, share, and reuse knowledge in a productive way. And there's lots of strategies for that, as you and I know.
Mm-hmm. Now that's interesting. So you got to capture it, and then you got to use it. And capturing is often when knowledge is discovered. And what I've noticed over the years is a lot of times knowledge discovered, especially integration of systems or final validation of systems, it doesn't occur when you author the widget that you're developing. Rather, it occurs sometime much different than that. So how do you capture knowledge if it's not on the original design? I mean, how do you index it? Is it an encyclopedia or is it something else?
Yeah, the art of capturing knowledge has been an elusive one, right? And obviously the more contemporaneous with the learning process the capture is, the better results you have. So we've often been, have seen, and Craig, I know you've seen, people trying to capture knowledge with a bucket, right? At the end of a process, you do an active after action review and you try to capture it in a bucket, and really the effort is all in the capture and there's very little reward for the process, right? And so
usually there's a disadvantage because it takes time out of your next job, the one you want to go to next, right?
Sure, right? But we believe that knowledge should be captured more in the process of the engineering workflows that are natural and the communications that happen that are natural. And we found that if experts that need to convey knowledge and experience that they're learning in real time have a means of communicating the knowledge as part of the process, then the capture becomes more contemporaneous with the learning. And that, we all write email every day because we know people will read it and it becomes a communication process and there's feedback. And really that bucket metaphor of knowledge capture doesn't have that kind of quality to it. And it becomes disconnected from the workflow of work. So what we really need is a much more continuous means of communication that captures the knowledge rather than a separate process.
Okay, so capture at the point of knowledge discovery.
Yep.
And then how do people find that knowledge so they can use it somewhere else? How do you go about that?
Right. So that's kind of key also. And we found that the way to best do that is through a provisioning mechanism.
Okay.
Which is the exact opposite of what everybody else does, right? So what everybody else does is say, okay, we've got some knowledge capture. Hey, engineering team, go search through this repository.
Yeah, exactly. They tell you to go do a linear search, or if you're lucky, somebody did indexing of some sort, or I think a lot of people use the word classification, right? If you just classify the knowledge right, you'll be able to find it. Well, what if you don't classify it right?
Right, and those top-down hierarchies, while useful, don't really solve the problem. So our approach was to provide a method of provisioning knowledge based on contextual cues of a process. You're in a certain phase gate of design, you're in a certain area of domain of that design, you're designing for a certain architecture, for a certain customer, for a certain region. And we allow schemas, multiple schemas to be placed over the knowledge, different it's basically a tagging process that allows.
But you said something really important. You said contextual, and you listed I think you listed 8 of them, if I counted right. And I think a lot of people do not understand this point, right? That you can have a different context. I heard a couple that were related to time. When in a process are we? I heard a couple related to how a customer might use this product, where they use it, or what's the situation they use it. Even a assembly context, of course, matters. That's the one people are probably most familiar with because they're trying to mate their part up to the part next door to it. But, dwell a bit more on context. How do you teach somebody what an important context is if they're not used to even thinking this way? I mean, I think it's essential to why you guys are successful, but I find people don't understand context. They need to be coached along the way.
Right, because normally knowledge isn't associated with context like that.
That's right. It's independent. It's in an encyclopedia.
It's an encyclopedia, and the encyclopedia has a good taxonomy to it, but all knowledge is placed in there. And one independent variable called a hierarchy, at GM, maybe you think of that as VPPS, which is the product name of the product structure, right?
Right.
But that independent hierarchy isn't the same thing as these independent contextual variables. And the key here is that the context that you would extract from is specific to the domain or the process. In manufacturing, the context may mean a plant, a region of legislative authority, EU versus Europe versus Asia Pacific. And in a different product domain or a different process, the contextual cues of the flow of work would be different.
It's just interesting.
So you have to have a system that allows. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you're fine. Please go.
So basically you have to be able to build up these contextual cues bottom up for a process. So now you're looking from the reuse point of view, not from the build a knowledge library point of view. And that's the difference, right? And here's the interesting thing I'd like to tell everybody, because that sounds complicated and it's not. what we found through experience is that contextual cues generally can provide accurate provisioning of knowledge with 3 independent variables. I've never seen, or very rarely seen it beyond that.
So everybody, when you use Google search, you're actually using a contextual search. You may not appreciate it, you may not know those words, but the context that search engines use have to do with who you are, where you are, when you're doing it, and things like that. And then, of course, there are different gradings. So it sounds like what you're describing, Jeff, is something similar with your product, this knowledge aware and how you provision it. I like your use of the word provision, but that's another one of those words that people are like, what does that mean? Does that mean load my grocery cart, or does it mean something else? And so expand on provision for just a moment too, if you would.
Yeah, again, it's the opposite of asking someone to search. So instead of people going to find the knowledge finds the people in the process, in the flow of work. And for lack of any other word, we started calling that provisioning. And for an obvious reason, that word was very popular in shipping, because provisioning and defense
Right.
kind of things, provisioning is actually far more common of a concept than maybe you and I are used to in automotive.
Well, it tends to be I think knowledge and the term provision, they just don't, that's not what you put it together. I mean, when I first heard it, when I first found out about you guys, a long time ago now, somebody at GM knew about you, they exposed me to it, and then they said, the really cool thing is they provision knowledge. And I'm like, okay, I know what those 2 words mean, and I've never heard them used together before. It's really interesting to provide just what you need to know at just the right time, and have a way to organize that. That combined with authoring it when you discover it, so that you don't have to go find stuff. I remember kind of another angle on all this is when you start learning about design for Six Sigma and learning about that control volume, or the boundary of the thing you're trying to design better, right? One of the questions you have to ask early on in the early phase is, okay, what other pieces of insight do I need to know in order to decide whether this system can be controlled, or whether all these things are noises, right? And you're trying to distinguish between a control factor and a noise factor. Well, knowledge is key to figuring that out. And I think people who become Design for Six Sigma certified, green belts, black belts, or master black belts, I think they really appreciate what you've done here. And frankly, I think that's why people in big car companies are using your tools. Now, when people look at your website and they listen to people like you and I, they get that for car companies. I'm kind of curious, are there other industries that are benefiting from what you guys developed?
Well, I can say for sure, first and foremost is my own company.
Oh, that's interesting. Now,
Yeah.
And you're a software company.
And
mostly,
we're a
right?
software company. So, back in the days when we were first noodling on these ideas of provisioning knowledge, we started with the mindset that it would only apply to very large, discrete manufacturing companies like automotive. And as the ideas developed, I'm very happy as a manager of a company that sells this type of software that the use cases broadened considerably. So we do this knowledge provisioning kind of concept when we interview people.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, in our software factory, and how we measure our ability to meet our software factory deadlines. We need to have certain things done at certain times, and we provision that knowledge. And the units of knowledge are process cues, quality metrics, things to do, things not to do, and they get provisioned based on where we are in the life cycle of a software release project.
And are you guys an agile shop, scrumming and all that?
Yeah, we are.
Okay.
So the typical sprint kind of process. And for a software company like us that also is into hosting, there's this whole idea of information security management and all the different activities that you have to do to be a secure company. And this idea of provisioning knowledge works really well for that too, because you need to know when and how to secure assets. You need to know when and how to audit your legal and contractual requirements. You need, I mean, I could go on and on and on, but this idea of provisioning knowledge works very well for those types of non-mechanical workflows as well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's one of the biggest applications that my peers at GM took, was way beyond just mechanical design, with performance engineering and peer reviews and all the rest of that. And we don't need to repeat that here. People can go to your website or the people they know in the industry about that. Google Auros peer reviews and you'll find it.
Yeah.
So, okay, so let's go down this other idea of active knowledge. So you've kind of described it from the point of view of making it available, making it relevant in the context, so at the right time. But there's also tools that are developed off of this knowledge, right? I'm thinking of the KBE tools when I first got to know you. Does that need a human being anymore, or is active knowledge set the stage for automation?
Wow, that's a great question. Probably for your audience, probably the most important thing for people to get their minds around, and hopefully people agree, because I think engineers will have their own ideas about this. But the digital tools that we're all talking about as part of this podcast are becoming more and more model-based. And as there's model-based environments for product design, for process design, for quality, the ability to automate the integration of knowledge and do active things with knowledge increases. So to directly answer your question, does this allow us to automate the application of knowledge? Yes. Today, maybe it's 10% of the knowledge. Tomorrow, it may be 25% of the knowledge. In a few years, it may be 50% of the knowledge. And in a decade, it'll be 100% of the knowledge, or near 100%. The point is, I think with close observation, it's undeniable, this trend. And then the knowledge management technique that is, embodied by the technology we offer and some others will help you get there. And it's going to happen one way or the other. The document-based library repositories for knowledge are going to be obviated by a more value unlocking process that makes knowledge available to these models. And as the models become more and more important to the process, then they consume the knowledge, and it automates the implementation and guidance for those processes, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah. So practical example, a couple of them. So one of the terrible things in the car business is routing a wire, routing a tube, routing a piece of plumbing, right? It's always done at the end because it's not really germane to the performance. It's usually a necessary evil. And I thought when I got into that world, 15, 20 years ago, I thought people would feel like their job was threatened because, this is done by a specialist right now to route. One example was an oil tube, for checking the oil level in your engine. Turned out those guys were ecstatic that this tool came along. We built a little KBE app that used your knowledge and Auros and was able to route it automatically with giving the clearances that you need and all this other stuff. So it's interesting to me that the people didn't object at all, because they would rather be working on designing an engine or a cylinder, not designing a gosh darn stupid little tube for the oil level checker, right? A different example that's a little more complicated was just making sure you meet a federal standard. The one I was familiar with was wipers, and at least in the United States, the wipers have to remove a certain percentage of the windshield area in order to be considered safe. And it's a late task in the development of a vehicle. It's a necessary thing to sell it. But you change the shape a bit, the windshield or other things, and all of a sudden your wiper design has to change. And so combining the best practice for these types of windshields, these are the types of wiper assemblies, and then designing all the linkages, automating that, people loved it. They got it off the critical path. They could just literally push the button and off you go. So I agree that this will happen. And the recent trends with artificial intelligence and machine learning, oh yeah, you get enough of this knowledge captured, then the provisioning side of it will just as likely go to a machine learning algorithm as it will to a human. And I think the interesting thing will be, yeah, but you still need the human judgment on these things. Some of these learning algorithms, they go off into the weeds pretty quickly, and you just got to realize they don't have enough data yet. That's the real issue. So I think there'll be a symbiosis in the short term between an experienced technical specialist who knows the design tools and understands the machine learning that's going on and can still make sure the knowledge is applied appropriately.
Right, Craig, I'd like to get your feedback on this. I mean, just to restate this
I'm interviewing you, but go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I happen to know how the wealth of experience you have.
Okay.
But the problem in today and in the recent past and probably the near future is that engineering companies or discrete manufacturing companies don't have the bandwidth to apply all the knowledge at their fingertips. People just start, at one point, they just start ignoring stuff because there's no bandwidth to do the consideration, or they've been through the design loop once and they don't want to go back through. And so, I mean, would you agree with that there's knowledge not getting applied?
I would agree that knowledge not being applied, and up until 6 months ago, I would have said it's because of the competitive nature of the businesses, right? I do think one of the things happening now with the quarantines and COVID-19 and everything going on is people have a chance to sit back for just a little bit and say, well, do we really need that next iteration of a product with a different paint color and so on? And it especially us guys in the car business here in Detroit, it'll be interesting to watch what's going to happen next. I mean, we've seen these trends before, but just our normal competitive nature in the car business combined with falling gas prices. I mean, holy mackerel.
Yeah.
I bet your trucks will come back. But then look at the clean air we got all of a sudden. And people are going to sit there and go and say, but I should buy an electric truck. And so maybe those guys across town at Rivian, maybe they got it right, and so it'll be interesting. I do agree with you that knowledge is getting missed or not applied because people are so busy. And I'm wondering if they'll still be so busy as we come out of quarantine, or maybe we'll be smarter in the choices we make. Smarter, I don't mean that there's an obvious answer. I mean more that we'll be more focused, right? And
for sure.
Instead of having 15 competing roadsters, maybe there'll only be 5, right?
Right.
Because at the end of the day, consumers won't demand the variation. That they're going to change their buying habits. So I don't know. What do you let's talk about COVID-19 for a second. So in your company, Jeff, how have things changed, and what are you doing about it? The surprising things about it are just that they're really, really surprising. So we were, as a company, we had to make the decisions everybody else did, right? And we're a little bit advanced. We were ahead of the state order to stay at home. We started working from home. As a virtual organization, we have been able to perform, at least in this short run, as well or better as a virtual organization. Oh, so you're eliminating meetings you don't need. That's good.
Yeah, and it's hard to say that it's sustainable, but at least heretofore we are operating at the same level or better. I don't mean to plug for Zooms or Zoom or for Microsoft Teams, but the ability to communicate quickly and face to face is actually better. Double click, there's the guy, there's the face, let's talk. Yeah, versus the random conversations that are a little less architected and may bring some serendipity. But I find our team meetings are going great.
It's interesting. So I work with a few other companies, and the ones that are software oriented, they actually are doing just fine. I feel very sorry for the folks in the restaurant industry and all those other things where things are clearly impacted. But those of us that are in the business of building tools that help you build products, services, I think, by and large, we're able to manage it. And a lot of people like working remotely. I for sure got rid of a commute, which is great. Right?
Isn't it?
Yeah, well, especially here in Detroit where the roads are, well, never mind. That's a different podcast. So what do you recommend to folks that are dealing with working at home as a leader of a company? What are some of the things that are working, and maybe what's one surprise that's not working?
Like I said, the online collaboration suites that we're using, we happen to use Teams, but I'm on lots of Zooms and others. I mean, leverage those things to the extent that they can be used, because it's not just a video chat, right? There's a multi-channel communications that are going on in the calendaring aspects and the Teams aspects and the file sharing and all those things. I would like to put a plug in for our own technology that with COVID-19, you might not have the same workforce that returns. And the durable capture of knowledge is an important aspect of returning to workforce. And so, certainly be thinking about how to return to action and not lose intellectual property in the process. And there are digital tools that can help you. The things that aren't working, I really, nothing comes to mind because we're a software company. The biggest thing that we've lost is a lot of our sales process goes through conferences and technical exchanges that are in person. Those all completely are gone, right? So we've now missed 4 or 5 different conferences that we normally attend and talk to people with. So that face-to-face time is gone. So those sales opportunity just vanish. But there are things we're doing to try to make up for it.
So that my co-host here, Thom, I know he's living through the same challenges. Thom, do you got any insight into what we're going to do instead of face-to-face conferences? I bet you do.
Well, I've made my living for the past 11 years speaking at these same conferences you're talking about, right? As either the master of ceremonies or as a keynote speaker. And for the time being, for 2020, these meetings are either canceled, or if they happen, they're going to be smaller and they're going to have a hybrid part to them, I think. Mm-hmm. I think when we get out the other side of this virus, and we will eventually, whether it's short-term or long-term, eventually we're going to get to the other side. I think we're going to return to meetings. 2019 was the biggest year ever for the live meetings business. And I think 2022 or 23, we will set new records. So I think that people will still gather face-to-face. I think the biggest change is this hybrid piece. I think that meetings are going to have to offer some sort of an option for people to be able to participate without traveling, whether their time doesn't allow it, or there's some sort of an outbreak in their area, or whatever. So I think there's going to be changes to live meetings, but I'm pretty bullish that we're going to be back to what we had.
Yeah, and I've presented it too now, and I got a couple more coming up. The one thing I don't like as a presenter is I miss the audience contact. Yeah, I can tell at an event whether I'm connecting or not. And gee whiz, when it's a one-way street, at least the three of us, we're having a talk. We know each other now a little better, and we can see each other, though we don't broadcast the video part. I couldn't see the people listening. We had 50 at one of these things, and I couldn't see anybody. And I guess I would just like one person, even if it's your face, Thom.
You're probably sick of mine after a year of doing this podcast. But I will tell you that the other thing you can't replace with all these great Zoom meetings or Microsoft Teams or whatever it is, you can't replace that serendipitous networking that happens at these live events. And, people are like, well, I don't think my company will let us go to live events again because they can save money, until your competitors start showing up.
Yeah, right.
And then people will be back. And so I think that, I've been doing some stuff where I've been facilitating meetings using Zoom breakout rooms for networking after a 3-hour conference. We'll use my Zoom room and put 100 people and break them up into small groups to network. And people like it, and it's fun, and it's unique because it's new. But it's not the same as actually hanging out at the bar and having a conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hanging out
Jeff
at
and
the
I
bar.
know each other. Yeah. Jeff and I would do that, right?
Yeah.
So Thom, did you have any last questions for Jeff? And they do have a conference in the fall or late summer, I guess is when it was, right, Jeff? Have you rescheduled it already, or are you still waiting to decide?
We are currently in a holding pattern. We have deferred promoting the conference until we have more visibility into when we can actually pull it off. And by the way, Thom, we are looking for a speaker.
I happen to know somebody, so we'll talk after this.
All right.
The one thing I wanted to ask you, Jeff, is because we get people like you on this show all the time, and I think it's great when you have somebody who started off in automotive, now you're over here, you're the CEO of this software company. What career advice do you have for people in this space, kind of this extended space around PLM and everything that's attached to it? A lot of the people who listen to our show are up and coming in their careers. What long-term career advice would you give?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. When I came out of college, I I had in mind, or at least it was ingrained in me, that there was a certain set of activities that you needed to do. You needed to go to the plant, right? Then you needed to be in the product engineering. You needed to have these rotations, right? And while some of that may still be true, I think the world is becoming faster, and real philosopher here, right? It's just the rate of change is increasing, and it's hard to argue against that. And the being adaptable will probably be the most important aspect to career development, and recognizing those opportunities as they come by and seizing them, and career-long learning, right? Always be interested and curious about the things that are going around you.
Yeah, curiosity is a very important skill, always getting it. And I use that as a feedback. If you're no longer curious, maybe it's time for a different assignment. And you know, accept those, especially if you're staying at a company, accept them that maybe aren't obvious, right? They aren't out of a playbook, but you will learn something. And as long as it piques your curiosity, I think it's a good thing to do. So
take risks.
And we hear that a lot on the people that we've interviewed on this show, is taking risks, being curious, continuous learning. And I think that the people who listen to this podcast, they already have that, or they wouldn't choose to tune in for 30 minutes every week. So thank you. I think that's good advice, and it reinforces to our group that they're doing the right thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Jeff, keep us aware of whether you're going to hold an event. And I, for sure, if you hold it in Detroit, will come with my mask, even though I'm in the old group that's at risk. But in any case, that's an inside Michigan joke for those of you around the country that don't know what our rules are. But in any case, things will keep changing, and we look forward to the time we can be face-to-face again in the same room.
I look forward to seeing you both.
Yeah.
Awesome. Hey, and thank you to everybody who tuned in and listened. You know, every single week we try to bring you really good interviews that are going to inspire you. And so we want you to tune back in next week, because we're going to have more thoughts, ideas, and information around product lifecycle management. Remember, the Digital Enterprise Society, it is the place for the exchange of ideas around digital manufacturing tools. Check us out at digitalenterprisesociety.org.
You've been listening to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Learn more about what you've heard here today at digitalenterprisesociety.org. Join us again next week for more connection without boundaries and creation without limits.